Hi everyone! Thanks for joining me today. My name is Anne Crawford and I'm the Reference and Adult Services Librarian at the Ponte Vedra Beach Branch Library. And today's topic is new true crime titles that have been added to Overdrive, which is our database for ebooks and e-audiobooks. And many of you may have been perusing Overdrive the last few months with your library card. And if you don't have a library card, I highly encourage you to go by your local branch library, which doors are now open, and get that library card so you can take advantage of both our print materials and all of our free downloadables. So last week I focused on nonfiction titles that have been added to Overdrive recently as late May. And this week I decided to focus in a little bit more on true crime. We have a lot of crime fiction, thriller, mystery, suspense, however you want to term it, readers in St. Johns County who use our libraries. And I'm one of them. I've been a crime fiction reader since I read Nancy Drew when I was a kid, and I've never stopped. And my parents and my grandmother were all crime fiction readers. And I remember the books that used to sit on their nightstands. With my dad, it was Tom Clancy, Robert B. Parker. My mom, it was P.D. James and Elizabeth George. And my grandmother, Dick Francis. I remember my mom enjoyed Sue Grafton as her beach read for suspense, which is another topic I'll be doing in July. So, big family of crime fiction readers. I have a beautiful Nancy Drew collection waiting for my daughter in a brand new bookcase my husband got me for Christmas, which was, for a librarian, an incredible gift. But in the last few years, I've gotten interested in true crime, and I know that many of our patrons enjoy reading true crime, or maybe, sorry, my signs just don't seem to want to cooperate today. We have patrons who enjoy true crime, as well as patrons who may be considering reading true crime because they're big crime fiction readers. And true crime offers a lot of opportunities. You want it to end right. Obviously, you don't want the crime to happen in the first place. But if it does, you want the perpetrator, the right perpetrator, to be caught and to pay the penalty for the crime committed. And in some of these titles, I mean, in a way, some of them do feel like tales, but they're true, even though they say truth is stranger than fiction. And you'll find out why that is so apt in this case. But in these titles, you'll find that sometimes there is a quick resolution, and sometimes it takes a long time to get down to the bottom of a case, and sometimes there are instances where we have crimes that are still unsolved to this day, that are still baffling the experts. So that's one thing that's intriguing about true crime, is finding out what it took to get to the right perpetrator, if that even happened at all. It gives you an opportunity to develop a lot of empathy and understanding for victims of crimes, maybe crimes that are hopefully outside of your realm, to gain more empathy for the victims, and also to understand that although we've come leaps and bounds with forensics and DNA and technology in preventing some crimes that happened 100 years ago, had those crimes happened today, we're still, unfortunately, have a long way to go to make sure that we're really doing crime right, in the sense of, are we really trusting and believing and supporting our sexual assault victims? Are we making sure that people of color aren't unfairly accused or victims of crimes themselves? There's a lot there to explore, and I hope that in seeing some of these titles, you'll see some titles that you want to check out and explore for yourself and see, what went right, what went wrong, what can we do better, and what tools are we using to solve these crimes. So that's a perfect jumping off point for my first title, 18 Tiny Deaths, The Untold Story of Francis Glassner Lee and the Invention of Modern Forensics. So for all of you CSI fans out there, because there are a lot of crime shows on TV, both true crime and fictional crime, this is an opportunity to learn more about the woman who started forensics, who started using forensics in criminal investigations. And I think that's so incredible that it was a woman who began that movement. And to see how far forensics has come, to see that how it started, but how much more advanced and evolved it already is. So if you're someone who's really into forensics, crime scene investigations, and this is definitely the book for you. So some of these titles are owned in print as well, and some are only owned in Overdrive. So they're definitely worth all checking out in Overdrive to see if you want to download them. And you can download up to 10 titles at a time and request up to 5. All right, so our next title is American Sherlock, Murder, Forensics, and the Birth of American CSI. So this is starting with the man who was considered the American Sherlock, solving numerous crimes, and who really kind of gave birth to crime scene investigations and using forensics and things like that. So again, another origin story to see how far we've come. And if you're a Sherlock fan of, Sir Conan Doyle, then you might want to try American Sherlock as well and see who our person was right here in America, a real person, and how he solved crimes and the efforts that he made. So again, like I said, if you want to learn more about the history of true crime, these are 2 great titles to start out with. All right, so our next title, like I said, we come leaps and bounds with DNA and forensics and technology in solving crimes, in getting the right perpetrators, in making sure that that the victims were honored by bringing the case to justice. Those are the words I'm looking for. I was going to find them eventually, and I did. So that's really important. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen, and that is the case with this title. The Central Park 5. You may remember the Central Park 5 if you were alive during the time that this was on all the news stations and in the newspapers. And they made an incredibly powerful mini-series called When They See Us. And if you haven't seen it yet, it'll get you right here, right in the feels, because it's powerful. And what I meant by making sure you get the right perpetrator, unfortunately in this case, we didn't. There was a terrible attack and a rape on a woman in Central Park, and 5 African American youth who unfortunately were in the wrong place at the wrong time were accused of this crime and went to court over this crime, and sadly went to prison over this crime, gave up years of their life, only to find out later, toward the end of their term, that it was someone else entirely who committed this atrocious act. So this is a really important piece of history that we should really pay attention to, because unfortunately this is what happens with people of color. They get unfairly accused of crimes simply because someone thinks they fit the bill, whether or not the evidence or clues truly supports that or not. Now, I believe all 5 gentlemen are out in society now, but you can imagine they've lost precious years of their life that they didn't deserve to lose. So again, not all true crime has a happy ending. Obviously, crime in and of itself is not happy by any means. Some have a resolution that at least brings comfort to the victim, and in this case, I'm glad that they found the person that was responsible, but I'm torn up at the fact that 5 African American youths lost so many precious years of their lives as a result. So again, it's like history. You're doomed to repeat it if you don't learn from it. So these are some really good titles to read to better understand what we can do better in the future. Much better. Now, in a similar vein, but on a more optimistic note, there's this title, Race Against Time, a reporter reopens unsolved murder cases of the Civil Rights era. Now, this was pretty incredible. So, during the Civil Rights era in the 60s, I believe it was 3 men were murdered by Ku Klux Klan members. And horrifically, those people were not brought to justice. There was no justice for those victims at that time. And the case lay cold. And the people who committed these crimes walked free. Until Jerry Mitchell came along. Jerry Mitchell devoted 20 years of his life to bring these perpetrators to justice and make sure that they paid for the crimes that they committed. And it wasn't until, I want to say, maybe not until almost 50 years later before the people who committed these crimes finally paid for them. And it's startling to think how long it took to bring these perpetrators to justice. And again, it's one of those things where now with the more advanced techniques that we have with DNA, forensics, and technology, and people recording things all the time, I would love to believe that someone would not walk scot-free for that long. But they did at the time, and it's incredible to know that Jerry Mitchell spent 20 years of his life, not 20 days, 20 weeks, 20 months, 2 years, 20 years of his life to make sure that justice was served. So really, really incredible, and there are heroes here in the true crime realm who really go above and beyond to make sure that the victims get due justice. I see we have a plane flying overhead, so we're just going to let that go here for a minute. Gosh, that's loud. What can I say? The joys of filming outside, right? You know, I get this beautiful backdrop, but at the same time, I can't exactly control what's flying overhead. So, moving on, speaking of people devoting their lives to solving crimes, leads us into our next title, Chase Darkness with Me by Billy Jensen, how one true crime writer started solving murders. And this is almost a companion title. I believe I mentioned it in an earlier video presentation that I did. If you're familiar with the title, I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara, which was one of our Ponte Vedra Beach Branch Library Wednesday Book Club titles, I mentioned that Michelle McNamara sadly died before she finished the book, and that her husband brought in 2 people to help finish the book for her, and Billy Jensen is one of them. And he talks about Michelle in this book, and he talks about how she was relentless in her pursuit of catching the Golden State Killer, and how he continued her efforts, as well as helped solve numerous other crimes. So if you've read I'll Be Gone in the Dark, or if it's on your reading list, I believe it's becoming a mini-series later this year, I also highly recommend Chase the Darkness with Me, because Billy Jensen was one of the people who helped make Michelle's efforts matter and come to fruition by catching the Golden State Killer. So definitely an empowering read, and again, like I said, you have to hand it to these people, and Billy Jensen, and who did I have before, Jerry Mitchell, and Michelle McNamara, of just a few who were determined to make sure that justice was served. Right, oh, time for our secret word. If you're watching this program today to gain some more points for our summer reading program, the secret word is Together 07, no spaces, all lowercase, Together 07. So thank you for watching this far. Please stay with me for the rest of the books. But again, Together 07 is your code to get points for the summer reading program for watching virtual programs. All right. So, as I said in my description of this program, true crime is not all about serial killers. Obviously, it does encompass serial killers, but like most genres, there's a wide variety, variety is a good one, but it'll come back to me. But there's a lot of different kinds of true crimes, and this one's certainly a different one. And this is the one I was referring to earlier when I said that having DNA and forensics and technology makes such a difference in these crimes. Because if we had those things, let's see if I move this down before it just falls over on me here. If we had those things at hand, perhaps we could have spared both of these families tremendous heartbreak, because this was the kidnapping that haunted a nation back in the 1920s, long before DNA testing. So the Dunbar family goes on a family vacation, and they have a 4-year-old boy, Bobby Dunbar, who wanders off from them, and they're setting up camp, and they're not paying real close attention to him as he's walking by the pond and things like that. And eventually they notice that he's gone. And so they go looking for him, and they can't find him. The parent's worst nightmare. Your child has wandered off, and you can't find them. So a search is performed. For months, they look for Bobby Dunbar, and they can't find him. And then finally, a strange man comes to town with a young boy, Bobby Dunbar's age, and Mrs. Dunbar swears that's her boy. That's Bobby Dunbar. But the man with the boy says, no, 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 this is not Bobby Dunbar. This is someone else entirely. But no one believes him because he's kind of suspect. Like, why is this man that's not this boy's father with him? And so they don't believe him. Well, then the mother comes out of the woodworks and she says, I said that this man could spend some time with my son. There was some miscommunication there, but she comes forward and says, no, 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 this is my son. And it goes to court. And it turns out that the Dunbars win, despite this woman saying, this is my child. Because the Dunbars had money, because the Dunbars had, a glossy reputation in society, and unfortunately because the other mother was poor and the man was suspicious and everything, she lost her child. So everyone just assumed this was Bobby Dunbar. So not only do years go by, decades go by, and everyone still thinks this is Bobby Dunbar. Until many decades later, just under 100 years later, one of the relatives of the Dunbar family notices something strange in their family's history and starts investigating. And they find out that that boy was never Bobby Dunbar. He was the boy the mother claimed he was. And so that family, it blew two families apart. And you just have to read it to find out all the details, because it is just mind-blowing that such a thing could happen. And unfortunately, it did. And it impacted generations after generations of both of these families. And today, you would think that sort of thing could never happen. They do a DNA test on the parents and on the child, and you just wouldn't have that kind of mix-up. But in the 1920s, there was no such thing as DNA testing. We didn't have that kind of technology. So it really is a mind-blowing case, and I really, really recommend it because, again, it's one of those truth is stranger than fiction. As a mother, I just couldn't possibly imagine what that would be like to adamantly declare that this is my child and still have my child taken away from me. Now, speaking of people that aren't who you think they are, we have Jack the Ripper here. And of course, those of you familiar with Jack the Ripper, the story goes that the women that he killed in the late 19th century were prostitutes. And so unfortunately, as such, they were kind of written off. More has been made of Jack the Ripper than has been made of his victims, which unfortunately is something that carries over to the 21st century, something we really need to eradicate. It needs to be a little less about the perpetrator and a lot more about the victims. And in this particular story, it's the untold lives of the women killed by Jack the Ripper. And you find out these women weren't prostitutes. Not that that should matter. People are still people. They still deserve an identity. But the identities of these women were not what we thought at all. And sadly, they got written off, but they were citizens of society. And these are their stories. So for once, you get the other side of the story. You get something about the victims and who these people truly were, as opposed to just nameless figures that unfortunately got written off at the time. So if you're a Jack the Ripper, I wouldn't say aficionado because that sounds like a fan club, but more if Jack the Ripper is someone you've read about and you wanted to know more, this is going to be a really impactful story about the women who were his victims, which is where the focus should be. It should be on the victims and not on the perpetrator. And again, speaking of the focus on the victims, we've got Unbelievable, which is just made into a Netflix limited series, and based on true events. And sadly, it's about a girl who's been raped and no one believes her. And unfortunately, that's all too common right here in the 21st century. But what happens is the way that the crime plays out for her that no one believes her about, it happens again with another woman. And it happens again with another woman. And again with another woman. And two detectives finally decide that they've got to find the truth. That this girl is telling the truth. And because there are people refusing to believe her, this criminal is continuing to attack women and collecting more victims. So it's really got an important message here that, we need to be more supportive of our sexual assault victims. And that's an incredibly difficult thing to come forward with, and it's not something that you necessarily can come forward with immediately after it happens. If you haven't been there, you don't really know. So again, what I was talking about earlier, how much true crime can really up your empathy and understanding of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, or putting yourself in a victim's family's shoes, and how would you react and how would you respond and what do we need to do differently. So again, incredibly, incredibly powerful. Now, I didn't promise I wasn't going to talk about serial killers. I only said that true crime is not all serial killers. So, we've got The Phantom Prince, My Life with Ted Bundy, by Elizabeth Kendall, which of course is her pen name. This is an updated version that has a chapter from her daughter, which is incredibly haunting. And just about everybody knows who Ted Bundy is. And once again, the perpetrator sometimes gets more of the spotlight than the people who knew him and his victims. And this is the person who spent many years of her life with him as someone who loved him. And that's a really interesting perspective to take. Not so much because they're trying to glorify Ted Bundy, not at all, but to show that at the time, in the 70s, when these horrific crimes were happening, how many people kind of bought into the act that he was playing. From people who lived with him and loved him, to the people in the courtroom, to the women watching the court cases. A lot of people were fooled by Ted Bundy, and there's something about that just cries for understanding, that reminds you that just because someone looks a certain way does not make them innocent. And conversely, just because someone looks a certain way doesn't make them guilty either. So this was used as the inspiration for extremely wicked, shockingly vile, and evil, which I think was a movie that they had on Netflix, and also the Prime original series Ted Bundy Falling for a Killer. So Ted Bundy is someone who has captured a lot of attention because, again, he got away with as much as he did because he didn't look like he fit the bill. And I think there's a bigger message there that you can't judge by appearances, either for good or for bad. You really have to be open-minded and realize that someone's appearance, and especially somebody's skin color, is not telling you at all what you need to know about the person. Now, this particular crime still remains unsolved, and I think you know who this is. This is John F. Kennedy. Reflections on the Life, Assassination, and Legacy of John F. Kennedy. And this is a really interesting book because they interviewed a number of people from all different walks of life who knew Kennedy, who interacted with him, knew him personally or professionally, and they asked them about their reflections of that horrible time, November 22nd, 1963, where they were, what they thought, how the nation responded. This book was written as the 50th anniversary back in 2013 of his assassination. So again, it's one of those crimes that has baffled the experts, and unfortunately we still don't have a concrete answer as to how it all happened. But this, like I said, it's an interesting book because you're reading about all these different people who might have been really famous at the time or were going to be really famous, or just names that you'll recognize, and they're remembering JFK and their interactions with him and just the incredible fallout of this particular event. For my generation, it's September 11th, 2001. For my parents' generation, the boomers, it's JFK's assassination. You remember where you were, how you felt, and everything about it. So we've got Leslie Rule, and you may recognize that name if you've ever read Anne Rule. She wrote The Stranger Beside Me, which is about Ted Bundy, and a whole bunch of other true crime books. Leslie Rule is her daughter. And this is my last title, and this is a perfect example of truth is stranger than fiction. It really is. Because it's about a young woman named Kari, who is a dependable employee, a devoted mother. She has a boyfriend, and then suddenly, out of the blue, via text message, she breaks up with her boyfriend, she quits her job, she leaves her son with her mother, and she disappears. And for those who didn't know her all that well, it was easy to just say, well, she just wanted out of her life, and so she just cut it all off and she took off, and that's all there is to it. But her mother, who knew Kari, said, no, this is very atypical of her. That I don't know why on earth she would disappear via text message. You know, something's wrong. Something's really, really wrong. And so she was very worried for Kari. Her boyfriend, however, on the other hand, was very afraid of Kari, because when Kari disappeared, he and his other girlfriend at the time started getting a lot of threatening messages via text, and they felt that Kari had become a stalker, because she seemed to know their every single move. So then you had to wonder, did Kari become a stalker? Was she that angry at her boyfriend for dating someone else? Did something happen to Kari, or was it something entirely else? And if you know the answer because you're familiar with the case, don't tell anyone, because you really need to read the book, because it is just unbelievable. But again, there's where technology can kind of make you hide in a way, but technology can also be what trips you up. And that's all I'm going to say about this tale. It's literally something ripped straight from Dateline. But like I said, Leslie Rule, following in the footsteps of her mother, Anne Rule, certainly an intriguing read, because unfortunately what technology has done is it's allowed us to kind of obscure ourselves, and you don't really know who's on the other side of that text message, or what they're really up to, or what their motives are. But again, technology can trip you up. So that's my last title. Thankfully, none of my signs fell and scattered all over the lawn. So thank you for being so patient with a plane flying overhead and signs blowing around and just different things like that. So I really hope you're looking forward to checking out these books in Overdrive with your St. Johns County Library card. I encourage you to share, like, and comment on this video. That's how we know we did a good job and you want to see more videos like this. We also appreciate any comments that you have, of any feedback that you want to give in terms of other video presentations you'd like to see, any true crime books that you've read that I didn't cover today that you felt were very compelling and eye-opening and just revealing. Like I said, it's on the one hand, from the surface of appreciating crime and trying to understand how it all works, is one way you can appreciate true crime. But another way to appreciate true crime is, like I said, the empathy and understanding it gives you, and where you can see where things worked out as best they could and where we still have a long way to go. So last but not least, view our videos on YouTube. So if you're not a Facebook user, you can always go to our YouTube channel, which is SJC Library Vid, and then that way, oh, sorry, that just fell over. I've got a lot of things happen today. SJC Library Vid, so you can look at not only this video, but all of the videos that all of our librarians have done since March. You can also catch us on Facebook, and we have adult presentations Monday through Friday at 3 o'clock. And thank you so much for joining me today. Don't forget, the secret word is together, 07, for the summer reading program. And happy reading, and have a great summer, and be well.